Chapter 6: The Awakening of the North. Winterfell didn't just wake up. It roared to life. For the first few days after Ned's return, the castle had been holding its breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop. But once the ravens flew and the riders were dispatched, the silence was shattered. The Great Keep became a hive of activity that would have made a chaotic RTS game look organized. The First Lords started trickling in within 3 days. By the end of the week, the trickle had turned into a flood of fur, steel, and shouting. The north was vast, empty, and generally quiet, but when you poked it with a sharp stick, like, say, burning its warden alive, it woke up angry. Ned sat in the great hall, the high stone seat of the Kings of Winter feeling cold and hard beneath him. "Lord Rickard Karstark," the herald announced, his voice cracking slightly under the pressure. The Lord of Karhold strode in. He was a gaunt man with a beard like a wire brush and eyes that looked like flint. He wore a cloak made from the pelt of a shadowcat. Karstark stopped before the dais. He didn't bow immediately. He looked Ned up and down, searching for the boy he remembered. "They say Ares burned your father," Karstark rumbled, his voice echoing off the rafters. "They say he strangled Brandon. And they say you rode through the mountains alone to call us." "They say true, Lord Rickard," Ned replied. His voice wasn't a shout, but he projected it, using a subtle trick of the Force to make it resonate in the chest of every man in the hall. "The Mad King thinks the North will bleed quietly. I intend to show him otherwise." Karstark's eyes narrowed, then widened as the sheer weight of Ned's presence hit him. It wasn't just confidence. It was an aura, a heavy, static pressure that felt like the air before a lightning strike. Karstark fell to one knee. "Winterfell calls," Karstark swore, drawing his sword and laying it on the stones. "And Karhold answers, 'My sword is yours, Lord Stark, until the last drop of blood.'" "Rise, Lord Karstark," Ned said, keeping his face impassive. "Save your blood for the Targaryens." This scene played out a dozen times a day. The Umbers arrived with the Great John roaring about smashing dragon skulls. The Glovers arrived with their quiet professionalism. The Manderleys sailed up the White Knife with a train of supplies that made Ned's logistic-loving heart sing. Every time Ned met them, he looked them in the eye, accepted their vows, and integrated them into the war machine he was building. He wasn't just a lord anymore. He was the gravity well that held the North together. But holding the North together required more than just speeches. It required power, and Ned Stark was determined to be the most powerful piece on the board. His routine became a punishing cycle of grind and growth. 4 o'clock, the witching hour. While the rest of the castle slept, Ned was in the Godswood. The air was usually freezing, dark, still, and biting. Ned sat cross-legged in the snow before the heart tree, wearing only thin breeches. "Cold is just a sensation," he told himself, shivering violently. "Control the sensation. Control the body." He closed his eyes. The Force here was thick, ancient, and heavy. It didn't want to be moved. It wanted to sit like a stone. Ned had to wrestle with it. Lift. He focused on a heavy iron shield he'd dragged out from the armory. It lay in the snow, weighing 20 pounds. Ned extended his hand. He didn't visualize lifting it with muscles. He visualized the space around the shield warping, pushing it upward. The shield groaned. Then it lurched into the air. 1 foot, 2 feet. "Hold it," Ned grunted, sweat freezing on his brow. The mental strain was immense, like holding a plank position with his brain. He held it for a minute, then 2. Then, with a gasp, he let it drop. Clang. "Better," he whispered, checking his internal progress bar. The 10x multiplier meant that every morning session was worth a week of intense training. In 10 days, he'd essentially done 3 months of Jedi initiate drills. He could now sense the heartbeat of a squirrel across the Godswood. He could lift heavy objects, though not throw them yet. And he could create a force push strong enough to knock a man off his feet, though it drained him to near collapse. 8 o'clock, the sparring ring. After a breakfast that consisted of enough calories to feed a small horse, Ned headed to the training yard. This was public. This was theater. The soldiers needed to see their lord wasn't just a strategist. They needed to see a warrior. "Who's first?" Ned asked, spinning a blunted tourney sword in his hand. At first, the guards had been hesitant. No one wants to accidentally bruise the Lord Paramount. But after Ned had casually disarmed Jory Castle 3 times in 10 seconds, the gloves came off. "Come on," Ned shouted, dodging a swing from a burly Umber man-at-arms. "You fight like old women. 2 at once. Get in here." 2 guards circled him. They attacked simultaneously, one high, one low. In the old days, Ned would have parried one and dodged the other. Now, force sense. He felt the intent before the muscles even fired. He saw the trajectory of the attacks as red lines in his mind's eye. Ned stepped into the attack. He caught the first blade on his crossguard, twisted his wrist to lock it, and then used his enhanced strength to shove the first man into the second. They tangled in a heap of limbs and curses. 3, Ned barked, sweat flying from his hair. I want 3. By the end of the week, he was fighting 10 men at once and winning consistently. He wasn't using flashy flips or lightning. He was using efficiency. He moved faster than he should, hit harder than he looked, and never, ever seemed to be in the wrong place. The rumors started spreading through the camp. The wolf blood, they whispered. 1300 hours, the war room. Afternoons were for the wiki. The Maester Solar became Ned's command center. He sat surrounded by maps, supply manifests, and confused stewards. My lord, Maester Whaleys tried to explain. We simply cannot forge enough spearheads in time. The smiths are working day and night. But the bellows are inefficient, Ned interrupted, not looking up from a map of the neck. They're using single-chamber lungs. Tell Micken to switch to a double-chamber system. Continuous airflow means hotter fires. Hotter fires mean faster smelting. I sketched the design on your slate this morning. The Maester blinked. A double-chamber system? My lord, where did you learn of smithing? I read a book, Ned lied smoothly. Also, the grain carts. Why are we using square axles? The friction is slowing them down. Grease the hubs and round the bearings. We lose 3 hours a day just on bad wheels. As you say, my lord, the Maester stammered, scribbling furiously. 2100 hours, the night shift. After dinner, which was usually a loud, boisterous affair with the gathered lords to keep morale high, Ned returned to his chambers. But he didn't sleep. He practiced control. He sat at his desk, a single candle burning. He focused on the flame. Calm. He tried to suppress the heat, to shrink the flame without extinguishing it. It was a test of fine motor control for the mind. Sometimes Benjen would come in. The boy was staying strong, adhering to his duty, but Ned could feel the longing in him. The Karstarks are loud, Benjen muttered one night, sitting by the fire. They think this is a game. They'll learn, Ned said, watching the candle flame dance. War has a way of teaching very harsh lessons very quickly. Are you afraid? Benjen asked suddenly. Ned stopped his meditation. He looked at his brother. Terrified. You don't look it. That's the job, Ben. Ned smiled tiredly. The Lord creates the weather. If I look scared, the storm breaks. If I look like stone, the men stand tall. On the 10th day, the army was ready. 14,000 men filled the fields outside Winterfell. It was a sea of gray and white, punctuated by the sigils of a dozen houses. The Giant of Umber, the Sunburst of Karstark, the Fist of Glover, the Merman of Manderley. The noise was deafening. The clash of steel, the whinnying of horses, the roar of thousands of voices. Ned stood on the battlements of the Hunter's Gate, Benjen beside him. It's time, Ned said. He turned to his brother. Benjen looked like he was trying very hard not to cry. You have the hardest watch, Ben, Ned said, gripping the boy's shoulder. Winterfell is yours. Keep it safe. Keep the people warm. And listen to Maester Whaleys, but trust your gut. I will, Benjen vowed. I'll make you proud, Ned. You already have. Ned walked down to the courtyard where his horse, a massive black destrier this time, a proper warhorse, was waiting. He mounted up, ice strapped to his back. He raised a hand. The trumpets blew, a long, mournful note that echoed off the ancient walls. The gates opened. Ned Stark rode out, and the North rode with him. The King's Road was a river of mud and men. The march south was a logistical nightmare that Ned managed with the obsession of a grand strategy gamer. He enforced discipline strictly. No looting, no straggling. Camp sanitation was mandatory. 3 days south of Winterfell, near the Castle Serwyn, they saw the banners of the Dreadfort. The Boltons had arrived. Roose Bolton rode at the head of his column. He was a pale man, his face smooth and unlined, his eyes the color of dirty ice. He wore armor of pink enamel that looked uncomfortably like flayed muscle. Ned rode to meet him, surrounded by the Great John and Rickard Karstark. Lord Stark, Roose said. His voice was incredibly soft, forcing you to lean in to hear it. It was a power move. The Dreadfort is yours. Ned looked at him. Force sense. Active. Most men gave off a buzz in the Force. Emotions, heat, life. The Great John was a roaring bonfire of aggression and loyalty. Karstark was a jagged rock of pride. Roose Bolton felt like nothing. It was like looking into a void. A cold, empty silence where a soul should be. It made the hair on Ned's arms stand up. The man was a sociopath, a creature of pure calculation. Lord Bolton, Ned replied, his voice equally cool. Your men are welcome. Take the rearguard. It was a slight, and Roose knew it. The rearguard was for stragglers and supply trains. The glory was in the vanguard. As you command, my lord, Roose said, his expression not changing by a millimeter. But Ned felt a tiny, sharp flicker in the Force. A needle of malice. I see you, Ned thought, and I'm watching. Keep an eye on him, Ned muttered to the Great John as they rode away. The Leech Lord, Great John spat. I'll keep a boot on his neck if you like. Just an eye for now, Ned said. We need his men. The march continued. They gathered the Hornwoods, the Serwins, the Tallhearts. The army swelled like a snowball rolling down a hill. By the time the ancient towers of Moat Cailin rose from the mists of the Neck, Ned commanded nearly 20,000 men. Moat Cailin was a ruin, broken and sinking into the swamp, but it was the most formidable choke point in Westeros. 3 towers remained of the original 20, looking like rotted teeth jutting from the black bog. Ned rode up to the gatehouse tower. The air here was thick with humidity and the smell of decay. Camp here, Ned ordered, his voice cutting through the humid air. Umber, take the drunkard's tower. Karstark, the children's tower. Bolton, you hold the causeway. He dismounted and walked to the edge of the causeway, looking south. The Neck stretched out before him, a labyrinth of swamps and lizard lions. Beyond that lay the Riverlands. Beyond that, the Trident. And beyond that, the Iron Throne. Ned placed his hand on the mossy stone of the ancient fortress. He closed his eyes. He could feel the ghosts here. Thousands of years of undull invaders who had broken themselves against the north. The moat was soaked in blood and magic. He breathed it in. Multiplier check. His connection to the Force was stronger than ever. The constant practice, the leadership, the sheer will required to move an army, it was all fueling his growth. He wasn't just a man anymore. He was becoming something else. A symbol. A force of nature. My lord. It was Jory. He held a scroll in his hand. A raven had found them on the march. From the Eyrie, Jory said, handing it over. Ned broke the seal. He read it quickly. Jon Arryn has secured Gulltown. Robert sails for Storm's End. The Vale is secured. Ned exhaled. A cloud of white in the damp air. Good. The board is set. He looked at the second part of the message. Riverrun remains neutral. Hoster Tully waits. Politics, Ned muttered, crumpling the scroll. He waits to see what we have to offer. He threw the parchment into a nearby brazier, watching it curl into ash. We rest tonight, Ned told Jory. Tomorrow we cross the Neck. We find Robert. And then... He looked south, his gray eyes flashing with a cold, terrifying light. Then we go hunting for dragons. Ned turned back to the camp. Thousands of fires were starting to burn, illuminating the fog. The north was here. The wolf had come down from the mountain, and he was bringing the winter with him. Chapter 7, The Caesar Maneuver. The war tent smelled like wet wool, stale ale, and a whole lot of angry men. Ned sat at the head of the map table, watching his bannermen go at it. It was basically a pack of wolves fighting over a carcass, except the carcass was a bridge they didn't even have yet. We storm the gates, the Great John roared, slamming a fist on the table so hard the map markers jumped. We've got 20,000 men. Fry has what? 4,000? We smash through the Twins and leave the old weasel in the rubble. And lose 3,000 men taking a fortified crossing, Roose Bolton said softly. His voice cut through the noise like a razor through silk. Walder Fry will stay behind his walls. He'll bleed us dry on the causeway. By the time we cross, the Royalist army will be at the Trident. So we pay the toll? Ricard Karstark spat. I'm not bowing to that Fry. Why should he profit? He holds the bridge, Galbart Glover pointed out. It's the only way across for miles. Unless you want to march south to the Ruby Ford and meet Rhaegar on his own terms, we need Fry. Ned listened, keeping his face totally calm. Inside, though, His mind was racing. He stood up. The arguing stopped instantly. The heavy pressure of his presence, that subtle force aura he'd been cultivating, washed over the tent. Walder Frye thinks he holds the keys to the south, Ned said quietly. He thinks we're desperate. He looked at the map. The green fork cut through the land like a scar. I'm not spending northern blood on Frey's walls, Ned stated. And I'm not making deals with him. Then what do we do, my lord? Glover asked. Swim, Ned smirked. It was a sharp, dangerous look that made even Roose Bolton blink. Meet me back here in 2 hours, Ned ordered. Keep the men ready to move. We aren't storming the twins. We're going to make them irrelevant. Ned rode upstream with a guard of 50 men, Jory Castle, the Great John, who refused to be left behind, and some sharp-eyed hunters. They followed the riverbank. The Green Fork was swollen with rain, the current fast and angry. It looked impassable. Perfect, Ned thought. He closed his eyes for a second, extending his senses just enough to check the ground, keeping it subtle so no one noticed. Terrain analysis. He felt the earth beneath the horse's hooves. He reached out into the water. 2 miles upstream, he found it. The river narrowed here between high clay banks. Beneath the rushing water, the bed wasn't mud. It was stone gravel with hard sand underneath. Solid, anchorable, just like the Rhine. Ned hopped off his horse and walked to the edge. My lord? The Great John asked, looking at the water skeptically. It's deep and fast. We aren't swimming, John, Ned said, staring at the water with the intense focus of an engineer. In his mind, he saw the pile's massive timber trunks, driven into that gravel and sand at an angle against the current. He saw the crossbeams, the trestles. He saw Julius Caesar's greatest watch this moment, reimagined for Westeros. We build, Ned said. Build what? Jory asked. A bridge, Ned replied. Our own bridge. We bypass Frye entirely. The Great John laughed, confused. A bridge? Ned, that takes months. Not stone, Ned corrected. Wood. We have a forest of reeds at our backs. We have thousands of men. And I have a plan. He crouched down in the mud, pulling a dagger from his belt. The soldiers gathered around as Ned began to carve lines into the wet earth. We don't use nails, Ned explained, sketching a complex joint. Iron rusts in the water. Wood swells. He looked up at the confused carpenters he had summoned. Mortise and tenon. The crossbeams lock into the piles like a puzzle. The weight of the bridge itself tightens the joint. One of the master carpenters frowned. My lord, to cut joints that precise. It would take a master craftsman days. Ned stood up. He walked over to a fallen pine log. He grabbed a saw. His hands moved with a blur of speed and precision that shouldn't have been possible for a high lord. In under a minute, he had cut a perfect, seamless tenon joint. He tossed the saw to the stunned carpenter. It takes minutes, Ned said evenly. If you know what you're doing. Now measure the width. I want 20 pile drivers built by sunset. Back in the war tent, the reaction was mixed. When Ned laid out the charcoal sketch, angled struts, trestles, piles driven into the riverbed, the Lord stared at it like he was speaking Valyrian. A wooden bridge? Lord Serwyn frowned. In this current? Driven deep into the gravel and sand, Ned explained, pointing to the diagram. Braced against the flow. See these upstream piles? They break the water's force before it hits the main supports. It's clever, Helman Tallheart admitted. But driving piles takes time. We work in shifts, Ned said. Day and night. Torches along the banks. Assembly lines. He looked around the table. Give me 4 days. If it's not standing in 4 days, we storm the twins. Do I have your accord? The Great John looked at the drawing, then at Ned. He grinned. 4 days to make the Frye Lord look like a fool? I'm in. Carhold stands with you. Ricard nodded. One by one, the lords agreed. It was crazy, but it was stark crazy. The next few days were a blur of sawdust, sweat, and noise. Ned turned the riverbank into a factory. He designed simple pile drivers, heavy logs suspended from tripods. Gravity did the work. Thump, thump, thump. The sound echoed across the valley day and night. But it wasn't just the common soldiers working. The spirit of the endeavor had caught fire. At one of the pile drivers, a team of horses was struggling to hoist the massive oak log for the next strike. The mud was slick, and the beasts were sliding. Out of the way! A booming voice roared. The Great John stripped off his mail and his tunic. standing bare-chested in the freezing rain, steam rising from his massive shoulders. "Heave, you runts!" He grabbed the thick hemp rope. Ned, seeing the struggle, stepped in beside him. He grabbed the rope too. "Together!" Ned shouted. Ned pulled. The Great John pulled. The log, which had stalled the horses, flew up the track as if it weighed nothing. The Great John looked at the log, then at Ned, a wide grin splitting his bearded face. "By the old gods, Stark, you've got the strength of a giant in you. Just good leverage, John," Ned grunted, slapping the giant on the back. Again, Ned was everywhere. He didn't sleep much, using his meditation to refresh his mind in minutes rather than hours. But he was careful. He kept his force powers strictly internal. No floating logs, no super strength in front of the men, unless it could be explained away as adrenaline. But they weren't alone. On the first day of construction, Jory spotted them. "Scouts," Jory said, pointing to the ridge. "Fry colors." "Let them watch," Ned said, not looking up from a blueprint. "Let them run back to Walder and tell him what we're doing." The scouts did exactly that. And Walder Fry, realizing he was about to lose his leverage, didn't just sit there. On the second night, under the cover of a storm, they tried it. It was pitch black. The rain was coming down in sheets, obscuring the river entirely. Ned stood on the bank with Jory and a dozen Karstark archers. The men were straining their eyes, peering into the void, seeing nothing. "My lord, we can't see a hand in front of our faces," Jory whispered. "If they come, we won't know until the bridge is burning." Ned closed his eyes. He blocked out the sound of the rain. He blocked out the cold. Force sense active. The world lit up in his mind. The cold, rushing water was a blue torrent. And there, drifting silently downstream, were 5 distinct clusters of jagged red heat. Hostile intent. Men with pitch and torches, holding their breath. "They're here," Ned whispered. He pointed to a patch of empty darkness in the middle of the river. 3 degrees left, Jory. Range, 40 yards. Fire. Jory hesitated. "My lord." "Fire," Ned ordered, his voice cracking like a whip. The archers loosed. A volley of arrows hissed into the dark. A second later, a scream rang out, followed by a splash and the sudden flare of a dropped torch sizzling in the water. "Again," Ned commanded, pointing slightly to the right. 50 yards. 2 degrees right. The archers fired again. More screams. More splashes. The remaining rafts panicked, the men diving into the water to escape the arrows that seemed to find them by magic. Jory stared at Ned, his eyes wide in the gloom. How did you see them?" "The wolf has good ears," Ned said simply, turning back to the camp. "Keep watch, Jory. They won't try again. They're getting desperate." The Great John laughed the next morning, watching a stray raft float by. "Good," Ned said. "Desperate men make mistakes." On the third day, the bridge was nearly done. The decking was being laid. A rider approached from the twins. It wasn't a soldier this time. It was Stevern Fry, Walder's heir. He rode up to the construction site, looking nervous as he passed lines of rugged Northmen glaring at him. Ned rode out to meet him, flanked by Great John and Roose Bolton. "Lord Stark," Stevern said, forcing a smile. "My father, Lord Walder, sends his greetings. Lord Walder wishes to extend an invitation." Stevern continued, sweating slightly. "He invites you and your banner lords to the twins, to feast, to discuss matters of the realm." Ned looked at the bridge, then back at Stevern. "Thank your father for the invitation," Ned said politely. "But as you can see, we are busy. We have a war to catch." "But surely," Stevern pressed, "a meal? A talk? My father is eager to." The Great John stepped forward, his hand resting on the pommel of his massive sword. He didn't say a word. He just glared. Behind him, Rickard Karstark spat on the ground. Roose Bolton just stared with those pale, dead eyes. Stevern looked at the lords. He looked at the bridge that was about to make his family's tollbooth worthless. He realized he was in a room full of wolves, and he was a weasel. He shut his mouth. "I will visit after the war," Ned added, signaling the conversation was over. "Safe ride back, Ser Stevern." Stevern turned his horse and hurried away. By the dawn of the 4th day, the bridge was finished. It was rough timber, smelling of sap and mud, but it was solid. It spanned the Green Fork completely. Ned stood on the bank, watching his army cheer. They had beaten the river, and they had beaten the Freys, all without swinging a sword in anger. "Form the columns," Ned ordered. "Cavalry first. Baggage in the center. Infantry rear. We cross now." The crossing took all day. Ned stayed at the bridgehead, watching the steel river flow over the wooden one. He felt a fierce pride. This was his work, his knowledge. When the last wagon rolled across, the North was free of the Neck. "Burn it?" the Great John asked, holding a torch. "No," Ned said. "Leave it. Let Walder Frye look at it every day and remember the toll he didn't get." He turned his horse south. The road to the Trident was open. "We march," Ned commanded. Chapter 8: The Art of the Deal. The twins. Walder Frye was having a bad day. Usually, a bad day for the Lord of the Crossing involved a grandkid asking for money or a wife dying before he'd secured a replacement. Today, however, was special. He was trembling with rage. The twins were his toll booth, his leverage. He had waited, sitting comfortably on his fence, watching the dragons and the stags fight, knowing that eventually, someone would need to cross his river. And when they did, he would extract a price that would elevate House Frye to the High Lords. And Ned Stark had just walked right past him. "He mocked us," Walder muttered, sinking back into his chair. "He left the bridge standing?" "Yes, father," he said. "He said you could look at it and remember the toll you didn't get." Walder's face turned a dangerous shade of purple. He gripped the arms of his chair until his knuckles were white. "He thinks he's clever," Walder rasped. "He thinks he can ignore me, but the war isn't over. The dragons have fire. Let's see if his wooden bridge can stop that." He looked at Stevrin. "Send a raven to King's Landing. Tell Ares. Tell him the North has marched. Tell him I tried to stop them." Stevrin blinked. "But father, if the rebels win?" "If they win, we tell them the raven got lost." Walder snapped. "Now get out of my sight." The King's Road. While Walder Frye fumed, the Northern Army was moving with a speed that defied medieval logistics. Ned rode at the head of the column, flanked by the Great John and Roose Bolton. The mood in the army was electric. They had beaten the terrain, beaten the phrase, and were now marching south with the momentum of a landslide. Ned, however, was focused on the horizon. Force sense, long range. He closed his eyes, letting the rhythm of the horse's gait lull him into a trance. He pushed his awareness south. It was getting easier. The map in his head was sharper now. He could feel the cold damp of the Trident miles away. And he could feel something else. A large, orderly mass of life approaching from the east. "Riders," Ned announced, opening his eyes. The Great John looked around. "I don't see anything, my lord." "Over that ridge," Ned pointed. 2,000 cavalry, heavy horse, veil banners. 10 minutes later, the first scouts crested the hill. They bore the Falcon of Erin. The Great John looked at Ned, shook his head, and laughed. "I swear, Stark, you've got eyes in the back of your head, and the front, and the sides. Just good instincts," Ned deflected. Jon Arryn rode to meet them. The Lord of the Eyrie looked tired but relieved. When he saw the sheer size of the northern host, nearly 20,000 men stretching back as far as the eye could see, his jaw practically hit his breastplate. "Ned," Jon breathed as they brought their horses together. "By the 7. How? I expected you to be stuck at the Twins for another week. How did you get past Walder?" "We didn't," Ned said, shaking Jon's hand. "We went around. Turns out trees are free. He built a bridge, Lord Arryn." The Great John boomed, effectively deafening everyone nearby. "Built it in 4 days. You should have seen it. We left old Frye crying in his castle." Jon looked at Ned, seeing the changes in the young man he had fostered. The shaggy beard, the hardened eyes, the quiet confidence that seemed to radiate off him like heat. "You surprise me, Ned," Jon said warmly. "You truly do. Come, we ride for Riverrun. Hoster Tully is waiting. Outside Riverrun, the combined armies of the North and the Vale, nearly 35,000 men, camped in the fields between the Tumblestone and the Red Fork. It was a massive display of power. Ned stood in his command tent, looking at a map of the Riverlands. Jon Arryn stood beside him, pouring 2 cups of wine. "Hoster has sent terms," Jon said, sliding a cup to Ned. "He's opened the gates for a parley, but he's making his position clear. He wants security. He wants marriage." Ned took a sip. "Swords for daughters." "Exactly," Jon nodded. "He proposes a double alliance. I am to marry Lisa. You are to marry Caitlin." Jon paused, watching Ned's face. It is a good match, Ned. Catelyn is strong, dutiful. She brings the Riverlands with her. Without Hoster, we are fighting the Reach and the Crownlands alone. Ned set the cup down. This was the moment, the divergence point. I can't marry her, Jon, Ned said quietly. Jon blinked. Can't? Or won't? Ned, I know you grieve for Brandon, and I know it feels strange to take his betrothed. But it's not that, Ned interrupted. He turned to look at his mentor. I am promised to another. Jon frowned. Promised? Since when? Ricard never mentioned. Harrenhal, Ned said. It wasn't a lie. When the memories had flooded back in the Eyrie, the memory of Ashera Dane had been the sharpest of them all. He remembered the haunting purple eyes, the smell of lemons and sea salt in her hair, and the whispered vows exchanged in the darkness of a tent while the tourney raged outside. He had promised to return, and he intended to keep that promise. Ashera Dane. Jon's eyes widened. The sword of the morning's sister? Ned, that was a dance. A flirtation. It was more than that, Ned said, the emotion in his voice entirely genuine. We made vows before the old gods and the new. I promised to return to her. I promised to marry her. He looked down at his hands. I cannot break that vow, Jon. Not for Hoster Tully. Not for an army. If I start this rebellion by breaking my word, what kind of king's justice am I fighting for? Jon sighed, rubbing his temples. He looked pained. Ashera Dane is Dornish. The Martells are loyalists. Her brother is in the Kingsguard. Ned, this complicates things. Hoster will not accept a vague promise of friendship. He needs a blood tie. I know, Ned said, which is why I have a better offer for him. Better than the Lord of Winterfell? The brother of the king, Ned stated. Jon froze. King? We have no king, Ned. We are rebels. We will win eventually, if not, then die, Ned corrected. And when we win, Aerys dies. Rhaegar dies. Who sits on the throne? Viserys is a child of a madman. Aegon is an infant. The realm won't accept another dragon. Not after this. He pointed to the map, tapping Storm's End. Robert, Ned said. His grandmother was a Targaryen. He has the best claim. He is the charismatic leader of this rebellion. He will be king. Jon stared at the map, the gears turning in his head. Robert, king. He never wanted a crown. He doesn't want it, but he's the only one who can hold it, Ned argued. And if Robert is king, who is his heir? Until he has sons. Stannis, Jon realized. Stannis Baratheon, Ned nodded. He is currently holding Storm's End against the entire might of the Reach. He is Iron Jon. And when the war ends, he will likely be the Lord of Storm's End and the king's brother. Ned leaned forward. Offer Hoster Tully that match. Catelyn marries Stannis. She becomes the sister-in-law of the king. Her children will be cousins to the crown prince. She gets Storm's End, one of the strongest castles in the realm. And Hoster gets a direct line to the Iron Throne. Jon stroked his beard, pacing the tent. Stannis, he is a hard man. Not like Robert. Not like you. He is dutiful, Ned countered. And so is Catelyn. They understand duty above all else. They will respect each other. It's a solid match, Jon. Perhaps better than me. I belong in the north. My heart is elsewhere. Jon stopped pacing. He looked at Ned with a mix of frustration and admiration. You really are your father's son, Jon muttered. Stubborn as a mule. It runs in the family. Fine, Jon agreed. I will marry Lisa. We will offer Catelyn to Stannis. But you have to sell this to Hoster. He won't like being told no. I'll handle Hoster, Ned promised. The great hall of Riverrun. Hoster Tully sat on his high seat, looking every inch the Lord Paramount of the Trident. He was a broad, powerful man, though his eyes betrayed the stress of sitting between two warring armies. To his right stood the Blackfish, looking grim and ready for a fight. To his left stood his daughters. Lisa looked terrified, clutching her skirts. Catelyn looked composed, her blue eyes scanning the men who had entered her father's hall. Ned walked in, flanked by Jon Arryn. The contrast was stark. Jon was the elder statesman, polished and diplomatic. Ned was the wolf, dressed in simple gray wools, mud on his boots, ice strapped to his back, radiating that unsettling, quiet power. Lord Arryn, Hoster greeted. Lord Stark. You are welcome in my hall. Your hospitality is appreciated, Lord Hoster, Jon said smoothly. We have discussed your terms, Hoster said, wasting no time. The double marriage. It secures the North, the Vale, and the Riverlands in a single bond. We agree to the alliance, Jon began, and I would be honored to take the Lady Lysa as my wife. Lysa let out a small squeak, but Catelyn remained impassive. And Lord Stark, Hoster turned his gaze to Ned. Will you honor your brother's betrothal? Will you take Catelyn? The room went silent. Catelyn looked at Ned. He wasn't the wild, handsome Brandon. He was solemn, plain-faced, and intimidating. I cannot, Lord Hoster, Ned said clearly. Murmurs broke out in the hall. Hoster's face darkened instantly. Cannot, Hoster growled. You refuse? You march through my lands, ask for my swords, and refuse my daughter? Do you take me for a fool, Stark? I take you for a man who wants the best for his house, Ned said, stepping forward. He didn't shout. He didn't look apologetic. He just projected authority. I cannot marry Lady Catelyn because I am sworn to another, a vow made before the war. Vows can be broken, Hoster snapped, especially vows made by second sons. Not by this son, Ned said. But I did not come here to insult you. I came here to offer you a crown. Hoster blinked. A crown? When this war ends, Ned said, his voice echoing in the hall. Aerys will be dead. Rhaegar will be dead. The Targaryen dynasty is over. A new king will sit on the Iron Throne. Robert, the Blackfish murmured, catching on. Robert Baratheon, Ned confirmed. He will be king, and his heir, until he gets an heir of his own body, will be his brother. Ned gestured to the south. Stannis Baratheon holds Storm's End. He is a man of iron will. He is the future lord of the Stormlands and the brother to the king. I offer you him, Lord Hoster. Hoster frowned, processing the pivot. Stannis? He is besieged. He might be dead already. He is not dead, Ned said with absolute certainty, thanks to the lore knowledge. He will hold, and when we lift that siege, he will be a hero of the rebellion. Ned looked at Catelyn. Lady Catelyn deserves to be more than just the wife of a warden of the North, Ned said, laying it on thick. The North is cold, hard, and distant. Storm's End is the seat of kings. Her sons would be cousins to the crown. They would walk the Red Keep not as guests, but as kin. He turned back to Hoster. Marry Lysa to Jon, the Lord of the Vale and the Hand of the King, for that is what he will be. Marry Catelyn to Stannis, the king's brother. You will have a daughter in the east and a daughter in the south, binding the realm together. Or, you can marry her to me, and she can freeze in Winterfell while I brood about my broken vows. Hoster looked at Jon Arryn. Is this true? Robert will take the crown. He has the claim, Jon confirmed. And with your swords, he will have the victory. Hoster looked at Catelyn. She was pale, but her eyes were calculating. Stannis Baratheon, the king's brother. It was a gamble, but the potential payoff was higher than being the Lady of Winterfell. And what of you, Stark? Hoster asked suspiciously. What do you gain? I gain allies who are fighting for the future, not just a marriage pact, Ned said. And I keep my honor. Hoster sat back, drumming his fingers on the armrest of his chair. He looked at the Blackfish. Brynden shrugged, a small smile playing on his lips. It's a bold offer, brother, Brynden said. Stannis is a sour man, they say, but he is highborn and durable. Hoster sighed. He looked at Ned with a mixture of annoyance and respect. Very well, Hoster grunted. Lysa to Arryn, Catelyn to Stannis Baratheon. Assuming he survives. If he dies, Stark, we will have words. He won't die, Ned promised. Then we have an accord, Hoster declared. Riverrun stands with the rebels. The camp at Riverrun. The wedding of Jon Arryn and Lysa Tully took place in the Sept of Riverrun. It was a hasty affair, lacking the songs and tourneys of peacetime, but it served its purpose. The banners of the Trout were now firmly tied to the Falcon and the Wolf. Once the cloaks were exchanged and the vows spoken, the celebration ended as quickly as it had begun. There was no time for feasting. The camp outside the castle became a beehive of organized chaos. The Riverlands were waking up. Hoster Tully had wasted no time. Ravens had flown from the rookery of Riverrun the moment the accord was struck. Riders were dispatched to every holdfast from the Red Fork to the Trident. Ned walked through the camp, watching the preparations. He saw the black banners of House Blackwood, with their dead weirwood sigil, setting up camp next to the Stark wolves. He saw the purple eagles of House Mallister sharpening their spears. The Brackens, the Pipers, the Vancess, they were all moving. Hoster didn't lie about his influence, the Blackfish said, walking up beside Ned. He was dressed in his scale armor, his helm under his arm. My brother has sent word to Stonehenge and Raventree Hall. They will meet us on the march. And the phrase? Ned asked, though he knew the answer. Still sitting in their towers, Brynden scoffed. Waiting for a winner, but the rest of the Riverlands is answering the call. We'll pick up another 10,000 men before we reach Stony September. Good, Ned said, looking south. We'll need every sword. He walked over to the map table that had been set up in the center of the camp. Jon Arryn was there, looking tired but determined, flanked by Hoster Tully. He looked around the circle of lords. Northmen, Valemen, Riverlanders. 3 kingdoms united against a mad dragon. We march at dawn, Ned commanded. We don't stop for rain. We don't stop for sleep. We join Robert's army. The horns blew across the river valley, a deep, resonant sound that signaled the beginning of the end for the Targaryen dynasty. The massive host began to shift, turning south like a great, steel beast waking from slumber. Ned Stark mounted his horse, feeling the hum of the force. Chapter 9, The Stag's Fury. Storm's End. The wind howling off Shipbreaker Bay usually sounded like a woman screaming, but tonight, to Robert Baratheon, it sounded like a war horn. He stood on the battlements of his ancestral seat, the massive, drum-towered fortress that had defied gods and armies for thousands of years. The salt spray lashed his face, sticking in his thick black beard, but he didn't blink. He gripped the stone merlons with hands the size of hams, his knuckles white. They're coming, aren't they? Stannis stood beside him. His brother was grinding his teeth, a sound that was starting to grate on Robert's nerves more than the wind. Stannis was iron, brittle, hard, and utterly joyless. Of course they're coming, Robert roared over the gale. Aerys wants my head. He wants Ned's head. He probably wants your head just for being related to me. The Lords Grandison, Caffrin, and Fell, Stannis listed, reciting the intelligence report like he was reading a tax ledger. They have gathered their levies. They intend to march on Storm's End and deliver you to the king. Loyalists? Robert spat the word like a curse. My own bannermen, turning on me for a madman who burns people alive. He turned away from the sea, pacing the ramparts. He felt like a caged animal. The energy inside him, the raw, chaotic fury that had been building since the news of Lyanna's abduction, was screaming for release. He needed to hit something. He needed to break something. They plan to join forces at Summerhall, Stannis continued. If they unite, they will outnumber us 2-1. We should provision the castle and hold. The walls of Storm's End have never fallen. Robert stopped pacing. He looked at Stannis. Hide. Robert laughed. A harsh, barking sound. You want me to hide behind stone while they march on my land? While they laugh at me? It is the tactical choice, Stannis insisted. We hold. We wait for the north. We wait for the Vale. Ned is fighting his way through mountains, Robert growled. Jon is securing the Vale. I am here. Now. He grabbed his warhammer, which was leaning against the wall. It was a massive thing, iron and steel, heavy enough that most men needed 2 hands to lift it. Robert swung it onto his shoulder with one hand effortlessly. I'm not waiting for them to shake hands and drink tea at Summerhall, Robert declared, his eyes burning with a terrifying light. I'm going to meet them. You can't fight 3 armies, Stannis argued. They aren't 3 armies yet. Robert grinned, a savage, reckless expression that made him look like the warrior himself. They're just 3 groups of confused men walking into a trap. I ride at dawn. He clapped a hand on Stannis' shoulder, nearly buckling the younger man's knees. You hold the castle, Stannis. If I die, it's yours. Try to smile once in a while if you become lord. Confuses the peasants. And prepare for a long siege until the war is over. Summerhall, the first smash. Summerhall was a ruin, a tragic monument to Targaryen folly, where a king had tried to hatch dragons and burned his whole family instead. It was a place of ghosts and ash, perfect for a battle. Robert arrived first. He had ridden his knights into the ground, pushing a pace that killed horses, to get there before the loyalists. They're coming from the north, south, and west, Robert told his captains as they sat amidst the blackened stones of the ruined palace. Grandison, Catherine, fell. They think they're meeting here to plan my execution. He stood up, hefting the hammer. They think I'm cowering in Storm's End. They won't have scouts deployed for combat. They'll be in marching columns. Which one do we hit first? A captain asked. The first one that shows his ugly face, Robert roared. It was Lord Fell. His column emerged from the treeline just as the sun broke over the horizon. They were relaxed, banners fluttering, knights chatting in the saddle. They expected a rendezvous, not a war. What they got was an avalanche. Baratheon! The roar echoed off the hills as Robert led the charge. He didn't use tactics. He didn't use flanking maneuvers. He used pure, unadulterated shock. He smashed into the center of Fell's line like a cannonball. His warhammer was a blur of death. The first swing crumpled a knight's breastplate like tin foil, sending the man flying from his saddle with a shattered chest. The backswing took the head off a horse. It was a massacre. Fell's men panicked. They couldn't form a shield wall. They couldn't brace. They were scattered like leaves in a storm. Robert spotted Lord Fell's banner. Fell! Robert screamed, spurring his massive destrier through the chaos. You want my head? Come and take it. Lord Fell, to his credit, was a brave man. He leveled his lance and charged. It was a mistake. Robert leaned in the saddle, dodging the lance tip by an inch. As the horses passed, he swung the hammer. Crack. The sound of iron hitting the helmet was sickeningly loud. Lord Fell dropped from his saddle, dead before he hit the ground. With their lord dead, the army broke. But Robert didn't let them flee. He captured them. Bind them, Robert ordered, his chest heaving, blood splattered across his face. Throw them in the ruins. Quickly. The next one is coming. Summerhall, the second smash. They barely had time to wipe the blood from their swords before the dust cloud of the Second Army appeared. Lord Catherine. He rode into Summerhall expecting to find Lord Fell waiting. Instead, he found a scene of carnage. And then Robert. Surprise! Robert laughed, charging again. This time, the fighting was harder. Catherine's men saw the bodies and formed a hasty line. But Robert was in a frenzy. The thrill of battle was singing in his blood. He felt invincible. Every blow landed. Every block was perfect. He was a force of nature, a storm made flesh. He cornered Lord Catherine against a crumbling wall. Catherine yielded, dropping his sword. Smart man, Robert bellowed, grabbing Catherine by the gorget and hauling him off his horse. Chains for this one. Save him for the drinking contest. Summerhall, the third smash. By the time Lord Grandison arrived, the sun was setting. The ruins of Summerhall were choked with bodies and prisoners. Robert didn't even charge this time. He just lined up his army, now bolstered by the weapons and armor of the defeated, across the road. Grandison halted his column. He looked at the devastation. He looked at Robert, who was sitting on a pile of rubble, drinking wine from a skin, his hammer resting on his knees. You're late, Robert called out. Grandison looked at his men. They were tired from the march. Robert's men were high on victory, covered in blood, looking like demons. Grandison sighed. He dismounted and drew his sword, then laid it on the ground. I yield, Grandison said. Robert stood up. He walked over to the lord who had planned to kill him. He looked him in the eye. Then he laughed. Good, because I'm starving. Let's eat. That night, amidst the ruins of the Targaryen dream, Robert Baratheon achieved his greatest victory. Not by killing men, but by winning them. He didn't execute the rebel lords. He didn't torture them. He ordered his own supply wagons opened. He broke casks of Arbor gold. He sat Lord Grandison and Lord Catherine down at his own table. He drank with them. He joked with them. He told stories of the battle, praising their bravery, mocking their terrible timing. You fought well, Catherine, Robert roared, slapping the man on the back so hard he nearly face-planted into his stew. Next time, try aiming for the horse, not the rider. I'm too thick to kill. By dawn, the banners of Catherine, Grandison, and Fell were no longer loyalist. They were Robert's. He had turned enemies into fanatics with nothing but charisma and a few barrels of wine. Now, Robert said, standing up as the sun rose, nursing a slight hangover but feeling like he could punch a mountain. We have an army. Let's go find the rest of them. Ashford. The victory at Summerhall had been heady wine. It made Robert feel unstoppable. He marched west, intending to cut off the Reach before they could join the main war. We catch them at Ashford, Robert told his war council. We smash the vanguard, and Mace Tyrell will run back to Highgarden to hide in his flowers. But Mace Tyrell wasn't leading the vanguard. Randall Tarley was. Robert arrived at Ashford with confidence. He deployed his men, seasoned Stormlanders, eager fresh recruits from the defeated lords, and prepared to do what he did best, charge. But Tarley didn't play by Robert's rules. When Robert launched his assault, expecting the enemy line to buckle under the ferocity of the stag, he hit a wall. Tarley had positioned his men perfectly. Rows of spears, disciplined and unmoving. Archers on the flanks, protected by trenches. Robert smashed into the center, his hammer claiming a dozen lives in the first minute. But for every man he killed, 2 more stepped into the gap. It wasn't a brawl. It was a meat grinder. Push! Robert screamed, his voice raw. Break them! But they wouldn't break. Tarley's discipline was absolute. Then, the horns sounded from the south. The main Tyrell host. Mace Tyrell, arriving late as usual, but bringing 20,000 fresh swords. Robert looked at the sea of green banners flooding the field. He looked at his own men, tired and bloody. Damn it! Robert growled. He felt a sharp pain in his thigh. An arrow. Then a slash across his ribs from a knight he hadn't seen in the chaos. He was losing. The realization hit him harder than the hammer blow. He wasn't invincible. He was going to die here in a muddy field in the Reach while Lyanna was still. No, Robert snarled. Sound the retreat, he ordered, swinging his hammer to clear a space. Fall back. North. We head north. The retreat was messy. Tarley pursued them doggedly. Robert fought in the rearguard, holding the line personally to let his men escape. He took another wound. A spear grazed to the shoulder. By the time they shook Tarley's pursuers, Robert's army was scattered. He had a few hundred men left. The rest were dead, captured, or fled. He was bleeding. He was defeated. And he was angry. The flight of the stag. The march north was a nightmare. Robert's wounds festered. His leg burned with every step. He rode until his horse died. Then he walked. When he couldn't walk, he leaned on his hammer. They crossed into the Riverlands, avoiding the roads. The realm was waking up to the war now. There were patrols everywhere. They're hunting us, Sir Ebert, one of his surviving knights, whispered one night as they huddled in a wet ditch. Griffin banners. It's Cunnington. Let him come, Robert rasped. He was pale, sweating with fever. I'll kill him too. But he knew he couldn't. Not like this. He needed rest. He needed a wall. He needed a place to heal before he could swing the hammer again. Stony September, Robert decided, looking at the map with fever-bright eyes. It's close. The small folk there hate Ares. We hide there. It's a trap, my lord, Ebert warned. If they surround the town, then we die in a town instead of a ditch, Robert snapped. Move. Chapter 10 Battle of Stony September. The River Road. The march south had been a grueling sprint, a race against a clock they couldn't see. Ned rode at the head of the vanguard, his eyes scanning the horizon. The exhaustion was there, gnawing at his bones, but he pushed it down, feeding his fatigue into the meditation techniques he'd practiced during the long nights in the Wolfswood. A rider crested the hill ahead, a scout wearing the trout sigil of House Tully. The horse was foaming, ridden near to death. Lord Stark, the scout gasped, reining in hard as Ned and the Blackfish approached. We found him, or at least, we know where he is. Where? Ned demanded, his voice tight. Stony September, the scout wheezed. But he's not alone. John Cunnington has the town surrounded. Thousands of loyalists. They've sealed the gates and they're tearing the place apart house by house. Ned felt a cold knot form in his stomach. Stony September was a trap. If Cunnington found Robert before they got there, the rebellion ended today. How long ago? The Blackfish asked sharply. They started the search yesterday. The town is resisting, my lords. The small folk. They're hiding him, but they can't hold out forever. Ned didn't wait to hear more. He turned in his saddle, looking back at the column of Northmen and Riverlanders stretching behind him. Double time, Ned roared, his voice carrying over the wind. Drop the baggage. We ride for Stony September. If the horse dies, you run. He dug his spurs in. The time for strategy was over. Now it was just a rescue mission. Outside Stony September, the town didn't look like a battlefield. From the ridge where the rebel coalition had halted, Stony September looked like a painted miniature. Slate roofs, cobblestone streets, and the shimmering ribbon of the Blackwater Rush winding around it. But the sound was wrong. It wasn't the clash of steel. It was the bells. They were ringing incessantly, not in a rhythm of worship, but in strange, syncopated clusters. A low toll from the September on the hill, a sharp, high peal from a watchtower in the east, a chaotic clamor from the market square. Ned Stark sat on his black destrier, listening. He closed his eyes, filtering out the wind and the nervous breathing of the 30,000 men behind him. He pushed his awareness down into the town, reaching out with his mind as he had done with the Shadowcat and the river. It was a maze. He felt the heavy, rigid signatures of the Loyalist soldiers, John Cunnington's men. They were frustrated, scattered, angry. They were moving in tight squads, kicking down doors, searching. But moving around them, like water flowing around stones, were the townsfolk. And deeper, hidden in the pockets of silence between the bells, was a burning coal of pure rage. Robert, they aren't raising the alarm, Ned realized aloud, opening his eyes. John Arryn frowned, looking at the town. The bells? Then why ring them? It's a code, Ned said, a grim smile touching his lips. The small folk, they're signaling Robert. Every time a search party moves, a bell rings to warn him. They're playing a game of cat and mouse. Then let's introduce the cat, the Blackfish said, drawing his sword. Ned drew his blade. This was a heavy, castle-forged longsword of good northern steel. It lacked the ripples of Valyria, but in Ned's hand, it felt weightless. Cunnington has his men dispersed, Ned analyzed, the knowledge from his other life overlaying tactical markers on the town below. He's doing a searching, though not a defense. His perimeter is weak. If we hit them hard, we cut them in half before they can form a line. He turned to his bannermen. The Great John, Rickard Karstark, Roose Bolton. No quarter for the Griffin, Ned commanded, his voice cold. He is hunting Robert like a beast. Today, he learns what happens when the North fights. The North! The Great John roared. The Vale! John Arryn shouted. Tully! The Blackfish screamed. The horn blew. A single, long, terrifying note that shattered the evening air. And the avalanche began. The breach. The charge down the ridge was a blur of motion and noise, but to Ned, it moved in slow motion. He let the familiar calm wash over him, his senses expanding until he could hear the individual hoofbeats of his horse and see the terror on the faces of the Loyalist sentries at the town gate. An arrow flew toward him from the wooden palisade. Ned felt the disturbance in the air before the arrow even registered visually. He didn't block it, he simply leaned slightly to the right. The shaft whistled past his ear, missing him by an inch. He hit the gate at full gallop. The timber shattered under the weight of the combined vanguard. Ned's horse trampled a screaming man-at-arms as they burst into the streets. The town of Stony September instantly transformed from a search grid into a slaughterhouse. Cunnington's men were caught completely off guard. They were in houses, in cellars, in lofts. They spilled out into the streets, trying to form ranks, but the narrow alleys worked against them. Drive them, Ned shouted, swinging his sword. Ned fought like a force of nature. He cleaved through a spear shaft and the man holding it in a single swing. He used the momentum to spin, taking the leg off a knight who tried to flank him. The street fighting was brutal. It wasn't clean lines of battle. It was 1,000 knife fights in a phone booth. Ned dismounted. A horse was a target here. He moved through the chaos with a fluidity that unnerved his own men. He didn't just react. He anticipated. As they moved down a narrow alley, he suddenly sensed a sharp spike of danger from above. Ned ducked instantly. A crossbow bolt slammed into the wood frame of a stall exactly where his head had been a second ago. He looked up, spotting the crossbowman fumbling to reload on the low roof. Ned didn't use a telekinetic blast. Instead, he snatched a throwing axe from his belt and hurled it with terrifying speed. The axe spun once and buried itself in the crossbowman's chest. The man toppled from the roof, crashing onto the cobblestones. Keep moving, Ned ordered, stepping over the body. To the market square. The market square, the heart of the town, was a cauldron of noise. The bells were deafening here, clanging madly as the battle raged. In the center of the square, the Loyalists had managed to form a shield wall. Behind them, shouting orders, was a man in griffin-emblazoned armor. John Cunnington. The hand of the king was fighting with the desperation of a man who sees his career and his life crumbling. He was good. Ned watched him for a second, analyzing. Cunnington moved with the grace of a trained knight, his sword flashing as he cut down a brave but foolish Mal-Lister man-at-arms. But Ned wasn't looking at Cunnington. He was looking at the building behind him, a brothel with a painted peach on the sign. The door exploded outward. A massive figure burst onto the street. He wore no armor, just a torn tunic and breeches, but he wielded a warhammer that looked heavy enough to anchor a ship. Robert Baratheon. Cunnington! Robert screamed with bloodlust. The stag crashed into the flank of the Loyalist line. It wasn't a fight. It was demolition. Robert swung the hammer and a shield shattered. He swung again, and a helmet caved in. A famous knight, Miles Mouton, one of Rhaegar's former squires, stepped forward to challenge him. Mouton was fast, skilled, and armored. He lasted 3 seconds. Robert took a sword slash to the arm, ignored it, and slammed the hammer into Mouton's chest. The breastplate crumpled. Mouton was dead before he hit the ground. "Robert!" Ned shouted, his voice cutting through the din. Robert turned, his face a mask of blood and fury. He saw Ned. For a second, he looked confused. Then a wild grin split his beard. "Ned, you glorious bastard! Get back!" Ned warned, sensing the shift in the battle. Cunnington! Jon Cunnington had seen the threat. He realized his line was breaking. He saw the rebel leaders converging. Most men would flee. Cunnington, fueled by arrogance and loyalty to Rhaegar, decided to end the war right there. He spurred his horse, a white courser, and charged straight for Robert, who was on foot and wounded. "Baratheon!" Cunnington screamed, lowering his lance. Robert raised his hammer, bracing for the impact. He was too hurt to dodge. He was going to try and tank a lance charge. No, Ned moved. He didn't blur. He didn't teleport. He just ran. He ran faster than a man in mail should run, his legs powered by the internal coil of the Force. He sprinted across the cobblestones, closing the distance with impossible speed. He didn't try to intercept the horse directly. He intercepted the angle. As Cunnington thundered past, focused entirely on Robert, Ned slid into the mud. He slashed his sword in a brutal two-handed arc, not at the man, but at the horse's front legs. It was cruel but necessary. The heavy northern steel bit deep. The courser screamed and collapsed, its momentum sending it tumbling forward. Cunnington was thrown from the saddle. He flew through the air and crashed heavily onto the cobblestones, rolling through the mud. Robert lowered his hammer, blinking. The lance tip had missed him by a foot. Cunnington groaned, scrambling to his feet. He was dazed, his fine armor scuffed and muddy. He looked up to see who had unhorsed him. Ned Stark stood 10 paces away, his sword resting on his shoulder. His gray eyes were empty of mercy. "You?" Cunnington hissed, spitting blood. "Bloody Stark." "You missed," Ned said calmly. Cunnington roared, drawing his sword. "I'll mount your head on the Red Keep," he charged. It was a good charge. Cunnington was one of the finest swordsmen in the realm. His strikes were precise, powerful, and drilled into muscle memory by the best masters in King's Landing. Against anyone else, he might have won. But Ned Stark was fighting on a different level. He felt Cunnington's intent before the muscles even fired. To the onlookers, it just looked like Ned Stark was impossibly lucky or incredibly fast. Cunnington feinted high. Ned didn't block. He stepped inside the guard with casual ease. Cunnington slashed low. Ned pivoted, his steel deflecting the blade with a shower of sparks, turning the hand's own momentum against him. It wasn't a duel. It was a deconstruction. Ned didn't use telekinesis. He just used perfection. Every time Cunnington struck, Ned was already where he needed to be. "How?" Cunnington gasped, backing away, his breath coming in ragged tears. You fight like a storm." "I'm a Stark," Ned said, advancing. "And winter has come for you." Cunnington, realizing he was outmatched, shouted for aid. "To me, Griffin Guard! To me!" 3 loyalist knights broke away from the melee and rushed Ned from the sides. 2 from the left, 1 from the right. Ned didn't turn his head. He sensed them coming, jagged spikes of aggression in his mind's eye. The first knight swung a mace at Ned's back. Ned dropped to one knee at the exact right moment, the mace whistling harmlessly over his head. In the same motion, he swept his sword backward. The blade sheared through the knight's greaves and bone. The knight screamed and fell. The second knight thrust a spear. Ned grabbed the shaft with his left hand. To the observers, it looked like a desperate grab. In reality, Ned squeezed with force-enhanced grip strength, crushing the wood. He yanked the knight forward, directly into the path of the third knight's sword swing. Friendly fire. The third knight cut down his own ally. Before the third knight could recover from the horror of killing his friend, Ned rose and delivered a pommel strike to his helmet. The blow, amplified by his internal energy, dented the steel like a tin can. The man crumpled instantly. 3 seconds. 3 knights down. No magic visible. Just brutal, terrifying efficiency. Cunnington stared, his eyes wide with horror. He wasn't looking at a wizard. He was looking at a warrior who simply did not make mistakes. "You're a monster," Cunnington whispered. "I'm a brother," Ned said. "And you hunted the wrong family." Cunnington, desperate, lunged. It was a sloppy, fearful strike. Ned sidestepped. He swung his sword in a flat, horizontal arc. The northern steel was sharp, and the arm behind it was stronger than any man's had a right to be. The blade bit through the gorget, through flesh and bone. John Cunnington's head spun into the air, a look of surprise frozen on his face. His body took another step before collapsing into the mud of stony September. Silence rippled out from the duel. The Loyalists saw their commander fall. They saw the wolf standing over the griffin, the sword dripping blood. "He's dead," Robert roared, limping forward, raising his hammer. "Cunnington is dead." The will to fight evaporated. The Loyalists threw down their swords. They turned and ran, scrambling over the walls, diving into the river, desperate to escape the town. The aftermath. The bells finally stopped ringing. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the groans of the wounded and the crackle of fires. Ned wiped his blade clean on Cunnington's cloak before sheathing it. He felt the exhaustion now, keeping the force contained, using it only to fuel his muscles and senses without letting it spill out into visible power, was draining. "Ned!" Robert limped over, supported by the Great John. He looked terrible, covered in blood, limping, pale, but his grin was blinding. "You got him?" Robert laughed, a wheezing sound. "I saw that. You cut him out of the saddle like a damn dancer. And then 3 knights," Ned said, gripping Robert's arm. "You look like hell, Bobby." "I feel like it," Robert admitted. "But I'm alive. Thanks to you." John Aaron and Hoster Tully approached, stepping over the bodies. "The town is secured," Hoster reported. "We're rounding up prisoners. A few escaped, but the army is broken." "And our losses?" Ned asked. "Light," John Aaron said, looking relieved. "Dennis Aaron was wounded, took an axe to the pauldron, but he lives. He's with the maesters now. He'll make a full recovery." Ned nodded. In the original timeline, the Darling of the Vale had died here. Saving him felt like another victory against a dark future. "We need to move Robert," Hoster said, looking at the King-to-be's wounds. "This is no place for the leader of the rebellion." "The September," Ned suggested. "The Septons can tend to him. It's defensible." The September of stony September. Later that night, Ned sat on the steps of the town September. The air smelled of smoke and rain. He held a cup of water, staring at his hands. They were steady. He had killed a man today, a significant man, and felt nothing. No guilt. No hesitation. Just the cold satisfaction of removing an obstacle. "You saved him." Ned looked up. It was Dennis Aaron. The Darling of the Vale had his arm in a sling and a bandage around his head. But he was walking. "I heard," Dennis said, sitting down gingerly. "Cunnington broke through the line. He was coming for me before he saw Robert. If you hadn't intercepted him—" "He was focused on the stag," Ned said. "You just happened to be in the way." "Still," Dennis smiled, "I owe you, Stark. My wife, she's with child. If I had died today—" "You didn't," Ned said firmly. "Go home to them, Dennis. When this is over, live a long life." Dennis nodded. "I intend to. They say you move like a wolf, Stark. I believe them now." He clapped Ned on the shoulder and walked back inside. Ned watched him go. He closed his eyes, reaching out with his senses one last time. He felt Robert sleeping heavily, his aura bright and chaotic. He felt the exhaustion of his own men. He felt the fear of the prisoners.